Good afternoon, y'all. Today I'm going to show you how to do section 3. So I'm going to provide you with a non-exemplar first. That's what we're going to go over, and why and how to revise this section 3 and how to make it better. And then I'm going to go over an exemplar with you all and why this was a good section 3. Now, just a reminder that section 3 is worth 4 marks total. And so it's not a lot of marks. We're not super worried about this section. But if you found yourself getting between only 1 to 2 marks, I want to show you how to move up to that 3 to 4 mark band. So today, as we go through this non-exemplar, I'm going to kind of pull out some different questions, some different things that you need to touch on, and same thing as we go through the exemplar. One thing we did notice is that you all use the exemplar given to you on the assignment, and some of you copied it verbatim, some of the words. And so know that you do need to change it up. You do need to put it into your own words, or it's going to come across as plagiarized when we turn it in to manage back and on turnitin.com. All right, so to start with this non-exemplar, it's only received 1 mark. So just so you know, this one received 1 out of 4 marks. And so we're going to go over why and how to make it better. So it says, this investigation allowed me to understand how historians use primary and secondary sources. Now, to start, a lot of you are saying how historians. I want to point out that you are the historian. And so you should stop saying the historian did this or the historian can know this. You should just say, like, I could know this or I learned this, okay? You can use personal pronouns in this section. It's one of the only sections you can. It's one of the only times you will be able to, but you can totally use personal pronouns in this section. Because you are the historian and you are the one that did this research. Okay, so don't say like how historians or the historian could read in. Just say, I learned how to use primary and secondary sources, and it helped me understand that finding good relevant evidence to support one's argument is difficult because there's evidence that contradicts and the evidence one thinks is right. Now, I really like this line. That's totally true. And I'm going to talk about how this person could have expanded on that thought a little bit more to make this section 3 better. So this person says the methods used by historians have all sorts of limitations because in some cases there's not enough primary sources to use or secondary sources to use. Now, the problem, and I'm going to highlight this in red. The problem with this line is that she's not talking about the methods that they use. They're not talking about the methods they use. They're just talking about methods in general. And what we need to do to make this better is think about what are the methods you used. Alrighty? What are the methods you used? And there's a variety of methods you can answer to this question. Did you use primary sources? If so, what kind and why? Did you use secondary sources? Again, were they knowledgeable historians? Were they articles written later on? Were they journals from databases? And why did you use those? And give examples. We want to hear about your investigation, so don't be vague. Give examples from your paper. And some of you might have used photographs, or maybe you used oral histories, and you should talk about those. Those are also methods of historians and how we find out evidence, how we discover new things. So talk about these, and again, give examples from your paper. Now, she said, this person says, some evidence that historians used could have been from Wikipedia, but because it's not a reliable source, I had to find other sources to help prove my IA take. We don't really need to know those things. Like every historian needs to start with basic knowledge, and so that is kind of like it's not necessary for you to state that in your section 3. So then this person goes on to say the topic for my IA was kind of hard to research because most of the sources were secondary. Now, this line is really awesome, but the only thing is they don't expand on this point at all. Notice we don't even know what war they're talking about. Reading this section 3, I have no clue what this person's topic is about. I know that they're researching a war, and that's it. And that is not how your section 3 should look. I should know from reading your section 3 what your topic is about and what were the hardest parts about investigating that topic and what were some of the easier parts of investigating that topic. And so to make this line better, we're going to scroll down a little bit. I would like this person to expand, why do you think those were the only sources available? And a lot of you had this same issue. A lot of you talked about how maybe you can only find sources that were dated 2 years after your event, or maybe you could only find sources 20 years after your event, or maybe some of you did things, a lot of you who did topics on like feminism, you talked about how there wasn't a lot to say. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that people have only been researching women's studies for the past 20 years? Why and why is that important, okay? So why do you think, I want to hear your thoughts about the struggles to find certain sources, but also like, why is that significant to history? Think about it. Women's studies has only been a program that's been around for maybe about 30, 40 years, not even. And it's been offered in very few universities, okay? Some people still don't think of it as a valid subject. I want you to expand on those thoughts and talk about those things. This person continues, what was valuable about the sources is that they were easy to understand and not as complex as other sources that I found, but some limitations because they could have evidence of one thing, but not a whole lot that I was actually looking for. Again, there's no examples here. This could mean anything. And so here we need to make sure we're providing specific examples. All right. And I'm going to write that. Provide specifics. Alrighty, y'all. Again, from reading your section 3, I should know what your topic is, what your research was about. Think about why there were only certain sources available, why certain dates were available, why maybe you could find a ton of primary sources on one subject, but maybe not on another. If you want to take a screenshot of this right now, you can. I'll pause for 3 seconds. All right, and we're going to scroll down to the exemplar now. So this exemplar is, I just wanted to point out that this exemplar is 434 words. That is over. Remember that your section 3 should be about 250 to 300 words. And it really just depends on how many words you have in your section 1 and section 2. If you find yourself like really close to that 2200 mark, remember total IA should be 2200 words max. So you cannot go over 2200 words. So if you find yourself like you're hitting that point, but you can't really take anything out of your section 1 or section 2 anymore, you want to limit down your section 3. Alrighty. Again, because this is only worth 4 marks, it's worth the least amount of points in the whole overall IA. And so you don't want to spend your number of words all on section 3. I would rather you spend those words in section 2 or 1. All right, some highlights of this exemplar that I wanted to just kind of go over. So in this exemplar, they talk, you can already notice just by glancing, and I'm just going to highlight that you know what they're talking about JFK and LBJ in Vietnam. She mentions some specific sources that she used. She talks about like the address to the UN General Assembly. She talks about the report on the Gulf of Tonkin. She gives us a timeline of when she's talking about these things. And so I like that just from glancing at this section 3 that I can already tell what the topic is about, and that's really important. Some highlights of this exemplar, and it's not perfect, but there are some really cool things about it. She talks about why the method, how she had to do background research and why that method was complicated, and how she needed to know more about the Vietnam War before actually diving in. The part that I really like that I'm going to highlight in green, this part, considering both presidencies spanned about a decade, the researching process was challenging and very time-consuming. Had to analyze hundreds of speeches, read various books, academic journals, and government documents to learn about their policies in Vietnam. That is where she, and I'm going to highlight this, that is where she describes the methods that she used. Those are all methods of a historian, talking about what kinds of documents you had to look through. And she even provides examples, and those are some of the ones I've already underlined, but I'll highlight again, for sources like NSAM 263 or the Phantom of the Oval Office. She talks about why those were easier than a government document or a book, but how she also had to look at Kennedy's address, which is a primary source. She had to look at Johnson's report on the Gulf of Tonkin, which is also a primary source. And so I like, again, that she provides kind of examples of both primary and secondary sources that she looked at and why some were more complicated or harder or easier to read. All this, I like how she says this too. All of the speeches were written 50 years ago when the language and circumstances were different. For these, I learned that going line by line and breaking down the meaning helps. Even little things like that can really push you from that 1 to 2 mark band to that 3 to 4 mark band. I'm pretty sure that this section 3 received a 3 out of 4 marks, which again is really good for a section 3 and what we're aiming for. We just want you to be in that 3 to 4 mark band. And so I hope, if I were to cut this down, I would probably cut out this paragraph here, where she talks about how history is different from being a scientist or a mathematician. If that is something that you really noticed at working through this IA, either the similarities in between history investigations and like science experiments, or you just noticed that these things are so different and you've realized that you would much rather be in a STEM field when you get to college rather than in history. Those things are important to mention too. You don't have to come out of this saying, I want to be a historian. You can end with talking about how you do not want to do this again because you find it so much harder to pin down solid evidence than you would in a math or a science. And so ending with what you learned is really vital, and you can see that they did that here toward the end of my investigation. I will say this: do not copy the exemplars. Again, they're gonna come back plagiarized if you do. Every paper that we've ever done at KIPP UPrep is in the database of things we run your paper against, and so if you have a line from an old paper or from an old exemplar, it's going to show up as plagiarized on your paper. And so don't copy anything, write things into your own words, talk about what you learned. If you want to screenshot this, you can. Alrighty, hopefully this was helpful to you all. Please reach out to Ms. Buchanan and I if you have any questions. Alrighty.